He built an empire by reading people, a trembling hand, a shifted glance, the specific way a liar breathes when the lie is already halfway out of their mouth. Kieran Drakov, 35 years old, boss of the most feared syndicate in the city, has survived this long because he notices what others don't. But the thing that finally breaks through his armor isn't a rival with a gun. It's a bruise on a housemaid's wrist, then another on her forearm, then finger marks beneath her collar. And the question he can't stop asking himself, who does that to someone who already looks like she's disappearing? If you've ever felt invisible, this story is for you. Watch until the end, hit like, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The marble floors of Kieran Drakov's estate were cold enough in the early morning that you could feel the chill rising through the soles of your shoes. Everything in the house was like that, beautiful and unwelcoming. The chandeliers were Venetian crystal, the kind that scattered light into 30 colors but warmed nothing. The hallways stretched long and silent, lined with art that cost more than most people earned in a decade, but meant nothing to the man who owned them. Kieran Drakov had purchased the estate 4 years ago, not because he wanted a home. He wanted a fortress. The distinction mattered to him. He was at his desk at 5:43 in the morning, which was typical. Sleep was a thing he managed rather than enjoyed. 4 hours, sometimes 5, always light, always interrupted by the part of his brain that never fully switched off. The part that cataloged threats, counted exits, noticed everything. The file in front of him was a shipping manifest, legitimate or close enough to legitimate that the distinction barely registered. His empire had many layers, each one more legal than the last the further you looked from the center, and Kieran maintained every layer with the same cold precision he applied to everything. No emotion, no attachment, just pattern recognition and consequence management. He heard the staff arriving before he saw them. He always did. The domestic crew came in through the service entrance on the east side of the estate at 6 sharp. His head of household, Petra, had been enforcing that schedule for 11 years without variation. 7 people in total. A cook, 2 kitchen assistants, a groundskeeper, 2 general housekeepers, and the woman Petra had brought on 3 months ago as a replacement for the housekeeper who'd retired. Lyra Ashcombe. Kieran had not paid her any particular attention when Petra introduced the new hire. He'd glanced up from whatever he was reading, registered the basic details the way he registered all personnel, female, mid-20s, quiet, unremarkable, and returned to his work. Staff were staff. He paid them fairly and expected discretion. That was the arrangement. He'd forgotten about her within the hour. What changed it was something so small it almost didn't register. It was a Tuesday, 6 weeks after she started. Kieran was crossing the main hallway on his way to the East Wing study when Lyra came out of the drawing room carrying a bucket and a mop, and one of his security advisors, a broad, loud man named Solt, who laughed too hard at his own jokes, appeared from the opposite direction, gesturing to a colleague and talking at full volume about some idiot who'd shorted a payment. Solt wasn't aiming for her. He wasn't even looking at her, but he swung his arm wide while he talked and his hand came within 2 feet of her face. Lyra dropped the bucket. Not from contact, from proximity. She flinched back against the wall so hard she hit the molding with her shoulder, both hands coming up in a reflexive guard, eyes shutting. The bucket clattered against the floor. Water spread across the marble. Solt looked at her with the mildly annoyed expression of someone who'd been startled by a cat. "Watch it," he said, not unkindly, already moving past. Lyra said nothing. She crouched and gathered the bucket with the specific practiced stillness of someone accustomed to making themselves invisible during moments of disruption. She did not look up. She did not speak. She mopped the spilled water with careful, even strokes, her sleeves pushed to her elbows. Kieran was 10 feet away. He saw the bruise on her wrist. It was a deep one. Not the yellow-green of something fading, but the dark purple-brown of something less than a week old. The shape of it was too deliberate for an accident, spread wide, concentrated on the inside of her wrist like a handprint pulled tight. He said nothing. He kept walking. But in the particular filing system of his mind, the one that operated constantly, sorting everything into categories of relevant and irrelevant, Lyra Ashcombe moved from one column to the other. Batama. He did not go looking for it. That was important to him somehow. the distinction between deliberately investigating and simply noticing. Over the next 2 weeks, he simply paid attention to what was already in front of him. The second bruise appeared on a Thursday. He'd come down early again, and Lyra was in the kitchen hallway carrying fresh linens. She had her hair pinned back and the collar of her uniform had shifted slightly, and beneath it, at the curve where her neck met her shoulder, there was a mark. Not a shadow. Not a trick of the estate's lighting, which he knew intimately because he'd had the system designed himself. A mark. 2 inches long, the specific angry yellow of a bruise at the 4 or 5 day mark. He looked away before she could sense that he was looking. That evening, he sat alone in the East Wing with a drink he didn't finish and thought about the 2 marks. His world was organized around the understanding that violence was a language. He'd spoken it fluently for 20 years. He knew the difference between violence as negotiation, violence as punishment, violence as power demonstration. He knew what a man looked like when he'd been beaten to send a message, and what a man looked like when he'd been beaten for the satisfaction of the beater. The bruises on Lyra Ashcombe told him which category he was looking at. This was not strategic violence. This was personal, which meant it was worse. The third time, it wasn't a bruise. It was the way she moved. Petra had organized a staff lunch in the estate's courtyard, some recognition thing for the kitchen team. Kieran hadn't paid much attention to the details. He'd come through the courtyard on his way from the garage, head down, already thinking about a meeting he had in an hour, when he heard raised voices from the kitchen through the open window. Not aggressive, just loud. 2 of the kitchen assistants arguing about a delivery schedule. The comfortable loud of people who knew each other well enough to bicker without edge. Lyra was in the courtyard, setting a table. When the voices rose inside, she stopped. Every muscle in her body went rigid in the same half-second. Her hands, holding a folded napkin, pressed flat against the table surface. Her shoulders pulled up toward her ears. Her chin dropped. And then, the thing that stuck with him afterward, she turned her body slightly, just slightly, so that her back was no longer toward the window. So she could see it. Not the reaction of someone startled by noise, the reaction of someone who had learned to track the location of loud things. The argument inside petered out in 30 seconds, and she resumed setting the table, slow and methodical, and Kieran stood in the arch of the courtyard entrance and watched her, and felt something he could not name precisely, but recognized as discomfort. Not pity. He didn't do pity. Something more like the feeling he got when a piece of data didn't fit the pattern it was supposed to fit. Except the data in this case had a face. He went to his meeting. He made several decisions that affected the financial futures of 6 people. He ate dinner alone and read 3 reports and answered 40 messages. At 11:30, he was still thinking about the way Lyra Ashcombe's shoulders had gone up toward her ears. Fuck. He didn't tell anyone what he was noticing. There was no one in his life he told things to as a rule, not because he was deliberately secretive, but because the habit of containment was so deeply built into him that sharing thinking felt as foreign as sharing blood. His second in command, a lean and precise man named Kyle, was as close to a confidant as anyone Kieran allowed, and even Kale operated strictly on need to know. This wasn't something Kale needed to know. This was still only a pattern. Patterns didn't become decisions until they were complete. What completed it was the 4th week of October, on a rainy Wednesday, when Kieran returned to the estate later than expected and found Lyra in the main hallway, on her knees cleaning a baseboards, and she didn't hear him come in. The rain was loud against the windows. The entrance was carpeted near the door. He came in quietly, the way he always came in. She was wearing a cardigan over her uniform. Both cuffs were pulled down as far as they would go, and as she reached forward to work the brush along the baseboard, the left sleeve rode up 2 inches. Not 1 bruise. 3, overlapping, the oldest a sickly yellow and the newest almost black. Kieran stood in the entrance for 4 seconds without moving. She heard him then, or sensed him maybe, the way people sense being watched, and she straightened fast, pulled the sleeve down in a motion so automatic it had to be muscle memory, and turned with the particular composed blankness of someone who had practiced not reacting. "Mr. Drukoff?" she said. Her voice was low and steady, carefully steady, the steadiness of someone actively managing their voice rather than naturally calm. "Lyra's," he said. Her eyes were on a point slightly to the left of his face. not quite meeting his gaze. He noticed that too. "I'll be done in a moment," she said. "I apologize for still being here." "Don't apologize," he said. She blinked. Just once, like the words didn't quite compute. He walked past her to his study and poured himself a drink, he did, this time, finish, and sat in the dark for a while with the particular kind of still anger he was most careful about. The kind that came not from threats to himself or his operation, but from the knowledge that somewhere in his field of awareness, a cruelty was occurring that his own mechanisms of control could not cleanly address. He was not a man who helped people. He was a man who managed outcomes. He sat in the dark and tried to locate the part of himself that understood the difference, and found, to his irritation, that it was smaller than he'd expected. He had her followed within the week, not because he'd decided to intervene, because he needed complete information before any decision could be made. That was the rationale he gave himself, and it was not entirely dishonest. Kieran Drakov did not move without full intelligence on principle. But underneath it, if he was being honest in the way he rarely was, there was something else, something that tasted like urgency. He assigned the surveillance to a man named Beach, who was thorough and discreet and understood that the instruction "I want to know where she goes and who she lives with" was not the same instruction as "I want her to know she's being watched." Beach had worked for Kieran for 9 years. He understood all the distinctions. The report came back in 5 days. Lyra Ashcombe, 26, lived in a third-floor apartment in the Callaway district, 2 miles from the estate, east-facing building, no doorman, mail slot broken. She had no car. She took the number 9 bus to work each morning and the number 9 back each evening except Thursdays, when she stopped at a small grocery on Perrin Street before heading home. She had no social contacts that Beach could identify. No friends she met. No calls she appeared to make for pleasure. No routines that were only hers. She lived with one other occupant, male, approximately 50 to 55, employed as a warehouse shift supervisor on the South Dock. Name, Roland Ashcombe, her stepfather. Beach had included a photograph. Kieran looked at it for a long time. Roland Ashcombe was a thick-necked man with the particular appearance of someone who had once been physically strong and was slowly going to fat. Broad shoulders, softening, jaw carrying the extra weight of someone who drank more than he moved. There was something in the set of his mouth that Kieran recognized with professional certainty. The specific complacency of a man who had not been held accountable for anything in a long time. "Anything else?" Kieran asked. "One thing," Beach said. "Neighbors know him?" "Not positively." Kieran looked up. There were 2 calls to the local precinct in the past 18 months, both listed as domestic disturbance, both closed without action. Beach paused. The responding officer both times was the same, a sergeant named Culver. He has a cousin who works at the docks. Kieran set the photograph down. "Thank you," he said. Beach left. Kieran sat with the report for a long time. The shape of it was clear now, not guesswork anymore. A man with connections to local law enforcement, a woman with no outside contacts, 2 closed complaints that should not have been closed, a trail of marks on skin that nobody with any authority had chosen to read as what they were. He had seen this kind of system before, not this specific version, but the principle. A structure maintained by the silence of everyone around it. Neighbors who heard things and decided it wasn't their problem. Officials who could be counted on to look away. And in the center of it, a person who had learned so completely that no help was coming that she had stopped expecting it. He understood, in a way most people could not, exactly how durable that kind of system was. He also understood how to dismantle systems. The night everything stopped being theoretical was a Thursday. Beach had mentioned that Thursdays were when she stopped at the grocery. Kieran hadn't intended to go himself. He'd told Beach to keep standard surveillance, same parameters. But at 6:40 that Thursday evening, he found himself in the back of his car on Perrin Street, parked 60 feet from the grocery entrance, waiting for something he couldn't have articulated a reason for. She came out at 6:55. 1 bag. Not heavy. She was carrying it easily at her side, not two-handed. She had her coat on, dark blue, slightly worn at the cuffs. Her hair was down for once, or partly down, a few strands coming loose from whatever she'd had it in at work. She looked, in that moment, extremely ordinary. Not the careful blankness she wore at the estate. Something that might have been almost relaxed. He watched her walk down Perrin Street toward Callaway. He told his driver to follow at distance. He watched her turn into her building. He told his driver to stop. For the next 40 minutes, he sat in the car across from the building and felt the particular idiocy of a man who had followed someone across a city without knowing what he expected to find. He was about to tell his driver to move when the light in the third-floor window went on. He could hear voices from the street. The window was cracked open despite the cold. He couldn't make out words at first, just tone. A male voice, higher than you'd expect for the size of the man, carrying that specific flat energy of someone gearing up rather than someone already at the peak. He heard Lyra's voice, lower, brief, conciliatory. Then the pitch changed. One sentence from Roland, loud enough that a pair of passers-by on the sidewalk both looked up. And then a sound that Kieran had heard in many contexts and could not misidentify. An open palm across the face, the specific acoustic of it. Then silence. Then Lyra's voice, quiet, coming through the cracked window like something bleeding. She said, "I'm sorry." Kieran's hand was on the door handle. He sat there for 4 seconds with his hand on the door handle. Then he took his hand away. He sat in the car and breathed. In through the nose. Out slow. The discipline of a man who knew that action taken wrong was sometimes worse than inaction taken right, and who was fighting. In this specific moment, every instinct he had that was screaming the opposite. He could go up there right now. He could go up there and demonstrate to Roland Ashcombe in very concrete terms what happened to men who put their hands on people who worked for Kieran Drakov. He could do it in 60 seconds. He had done things like it before. And then Lyra would show up to work Monday morning with a man no longer in her apartment and a debt to Kieran Drakov, and she would understand exactly what kind of power she had traded herself into. He knew what that looked like. He had seen that trade made, and he knew what it cost, and he would not do it. Not like that. He made his driver take him home. He didn't sleep. By 4 in the morning, he had made 2 decisions. The first, he needed to talk to her directly. The second, he needed to know what he was going to say before he did. He gave himself 2 days to think. He spent them doing the work he always did. Meetings, reports, the management of an empire that operated on the principle that everything was a transaction, and every transaction had a cost. He was good at this. He had been good at this since he was 19 years old, and had understood, with a clarity that most people his age couldn't access, that the world sorted people into those who set the terms and those who accepted them. He had decided very early which category he intended to occupy. What he was not good at was this. He did not have a template for this. On Saturday morning, 15 minutes before Lyra was due to start her shift, he told Petra he needed to speak with the new housekeeper privately. Petra did not ask questions. She understood that when Kieran Drakov said he needed something done, the nature of the need was not her concern. He waited in the small sitting room off the main hallway. The room was almost never used. It was too bright in the morning, the east windows flooding it with the kind of direct light that felt aggressive before 9 a.m. He stood rather than sat. He didn't want to be sitting when she came in. Sitting felt like control. He wasn't sure he had the right to that posture, in this room, for this conversation. She appeared in the doorway at 7:58. She saw him standing in the sitting room and she stopped. He watched her face complete a rapid sequence. Surprise, assessment, the beginning of the careful blankness, and then beneath the blankness, barely suppressed, something that looked like alarm. Her chin came up slightly. Her hands, at her sides, stayed very still. "Petra said you wanted to speak with me," she said. "Yes." A pause. She waited for him to continue. When he didn't immediately, she filled the silence the way people who were afraid of silences always did. "If it's about Thursday's floor in the East Corridor, I know I missed a section near the window. I'll take care of it today." "It's not about the floor," he said. Another pause. Different quality. She knew. He could see her know it in the way her shoulders changed, something dropping and tightening simultaneously. A preparation. "Who did that to your arm?" he said. The breath she took was almost imperceptible. Almost. "Mr. Drakov." "You've been working here for 3 months," he said. "In that time, you've had at least 5 separate bruising injuries, all of which are inconsistent with domestic accidents, all of which are consistent with being grabbed, struck, and restrained by someone larger than you. I'm not asking out of curiosity. She looked at him directly for the first time since she'd come in. Her eyes were dark brown and very still and full of something he recognized because he had seen it in a mirror often enough. The specific composure of someone who was absolutely terrified and had decided that the only acceptable response to terror was stillness. "With respect," she said, and her voice was extraordinarily level, "it's not your concern." "You work in my house," he said. "My personal life is my own." "Your personal life is being conducted on your skin," he said. "I've been watching those marks appear for 2 months. What's happening to you?" Her jaw tightened, just briefly. "Nothing is happening to me," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. The distance between what she'd said and what was true was so enormous that it filled the room like weather. "Lyra," he said, and something in the way he said it, not the tone of an employer, not the tone of authority, just the flat weight of someone who had sat in a car on a Thursday night and heard what he'd heard, made her eyes drop for just a second before she pulled them back. "Please," she said, "I need this job." "You're not losing this job. Then please leave this alone." Her voice cracked on the last word. Not much, but enough. She heard it herself, he could tell, because her hand came up and pressed briefly against her collarbone and then dropped back down. "Please. It's not... I can manage it." "You've been managing it for a long time," he said. She said nothing. "That's not the same as it being manageable," he said. The silence stretched out. Outside the window, the city was beginning its morning noise. A truck. A horn somewhere several blocks away. The ordinary machinery of a world that did not know this room existed. "I appreciate your concern," Lyra said finally, and it was the most closed sound he had ever heard from a human being. "I really do. But I need you to understand that your concern, however genuine, cannot help me. It can only make things worse." He wanted to ask her what she meant by worse. He didn't. He knew what she meant by worse. "All right," he said. She blinked. "Go ahead and start your shift," he said. He turned away from her toward the window because turning away was the only motion he trusted himself to make. "Thank you for your time." He heard her leave. He stood at the window and watched the morning traffic on the street below, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could reliably remember, that he had no idea what the correct move was. And underneath that, beneath the strategic uncertainty, beneath the professional discomfort of being in a situation without a clear template, was something older and less manageable. He kept hearing her voice through that cracked apartment window. "I'm sorry," said to the man who had hit her, said his apology for being hit. He stood at the window until he heard her moving in the hallway outside, the sound of her work beginning, and then he went to his study and opened a file and stared at it for 20 minutes without reading a single word. But she didn't come in Monday. Petra told him at 9 that morning, matter-of-factly, in the way Petra communicated all staff information, without editorial, without speculation. "Lyra called in sick. She'll be in Wednesday." Kieran said nothing. He opened his laptop and found the case files he'd had Beach put together and looked at them for a long time. Incident report number 1. October, 2 years ago. Neighbors reported shouting and what one described as a crash sound. Responding officer arrived, spoke with both occupants. Notes read, "Situation appears domestic dispute. Both parties calm at time of visit. No injuries observed. No further action required. Signed, Sergeant T. Culver." Incident report number 2. March of this year, anonymous caller. This time the notes read, "Female occupant states fall from chair. No evidence of assault. Occupant declined to press charges. Signed, Sergeant T. Culver. No evidence of assault." Kieran stared at those 4 words. He had spent 20 years in environments where evidence was a managed resource. He knew exactly what no evidence of assault meant when a sergeant with a convenient family connection wrote it about a woman who had learned that saying anything other than "I fell" made everything worse. She was right in the sitting room. He had asked her a direct question, and his concern could not help her. And she had known that with a specificity he was only now fully understanding. She hadn't been deflecting. She had been telling him a true thing about how her world worked. The system that held Lyra Ashcombe in place was not Roland Ashcombe alone. It was every closed report, every neighbor who decided it wasn't their place, every institution that processed her pain and filed it and moved on. She had learned the lesson that system taught. Nobody comes, nobody stays. And if someone shows up asking questions, it gets worse after they leave. He sat with this for a long time. He was a man who had spent his adult life on the outer edges of institutional legitimacy, and there were things about the systems that operated in that space he understood with precision that most people who'd lived inside the lines could not. He knew how systems maintained themselves. He knew the specific architecture of control, not the dramatic version, not the locked room version, but the mundane version. The version built out of exhaustion and learned helplessness, and the simple mathematics of, every time I tried, it cost me more than it gave me. Lyra Ashcombe had run those mathematics and arrived at her conclusion, and it was not an irrational conclusion. It was only wrong. Wednesday came. She appeared at 7:58 again, same precision, and he happened to be crossing the hallway when she came through the service entrance, and she looked up and saw him, and for a fraction of a second every careful composition dropped, and what was underneath it was an expression he was not going to forget for a very long time. She looked like someone waiting to be punished for having been witnessed. He said good morning and kept walking. He felt her watching him as he went. He went to his study and called Kyle. I need you, he said, to pull everything you can find on a man named Roland Ashcombe, South Dock warehouse supervisor, whatever he owes, whoever he owes it to. I want the full shape of him by Friday. Cale paused only briefly. Personal project? Yes. All right, Cale said, and he didn't ask anything else because he understood Kieran well enough to know that personal project was a category that didn't require explanation, only execution. Kieran hung up and looked at the window and thought about Lyra Ashcombe telling him she could manage it. Not for much longer, he thought, and he was not certain even now if he was thinking it as a threat or a promise. But Thursday came around again before Cale's report did, and on Thursday evening, Beach's standing surveillance call came in at 7:22, and the first thing Beach said was, "She came home from the grocery at the usual time. He was already home when she got there. Sir, it's escalating." Kieran said, "How bad?" Beach said, "Bad enough that I'm asking if you want me to call someone." "No," Kieran said. "No one calls anyone. Stay on position. I'm coming." He was already standing when he said it, already reaching for his coat, and somewhere underneath the tactical thinking and the management of consequences and the carefully maintained distance he kept from everything that couldn't be transacted, something that was not quite cold rage and not quite grief, was opening in his chest like a door he'd long assumed was sealed. He was going to need to make a decision, the kind that couldn't be unmade, and he had approximately 12 minutes to figure out what it was. The number 9 bus ran north to south on Callaway every 11 minutes after 6 p.m. Kieran knew this because Beach had put it in the report, and Kieran forgot almost nothing that had been put in a report. He knew the building had no doorman. He knew the third-floor east window was the one that cracked open even in October because the radiator in that apartment ran hot on the left wall and the heat had nowhere to go. He knew Roland Ashcombe came home from the South Dock by 6 most evenings, except Fridays, when the shift ran long. He knew all of this, and none of it had prepared him for sitting in the back of his car outside a building on Callaway Street listening to Beach tell him it was escalating. "Define escalating," he said. His voice came out flat. He was working to keep it flat. "Shouting started about 15 minutes after she got home," Beach said through the phone. He was somewhere on the street. Kieran could hear the ambient noise of the block behind him, a television from a lower floor window, the specific wet sound of tires on damp pavement. Couldn't make out the words from my position. Then it went quiet for a few minutes. Then it started again, louder. And now? Quiet again. That kind of quiet. Kieran knew what that kind of quiet meant. He'd been in enough rooms after enough violence to understand that the silence following a storm was not peace. It was assessment. It was the stillness of a person determining whether the threat had passed or only paused. "I'm 5 minutes out," he said. "Stay where you are." He put the phone in his jacket pocket and looked out the car window at the city moving past. A convenience store. A woman walking a small dog. 2 men arguing cheerfully outside a bar. The entire ordinary world continuing its ordinary business with no awareness of the third-floor window on Callaway Street, and felt the particular pressure behind his sternum that he had learned over many years to treat as a signal rather than an emotion. It was telling him he was already too late for whatever had just happened. It was also telling him he was not too late for what came after. Those were different problems. Pull over here, he told his driver. They were still 2 blocks from the building. He got out on foot. He didn't examine the decision too carefully. There was something about arriving in the car, with the driver, with the full apparatus of who Kieran Drakov was, that felt wrong for what he was walking toward. He pulled his coat collar up against the cold and walked. Beach materialized from a doorway halfway down the block. He was a spare man, the kind whose face was easy to forget, which was most of his professional value. He fell into step beside Kieran without being asked. "Third floor," Beach said quietly. "Lights still on." "Anyone go in or out after her?" "No, he was already inside when she got back." They stopped at the building entrance. Kieran looked up at the third-floor window. The curtain was drawn now. The light behind it was steady. "Go home," Kieran told Beach. Beach looked at him for a moment. "Sir?" "Go home." Beach went. Kieran stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer. A man walking past gave him a brief, curious look and then looked away, which was the correct response to the expression on Kieran Drakov's face at that particular moment. He did not go upstairs. He wanted to. That was the honest accounting of it. The part of him that operated on direct solutions was extremely clear about what the direct solution looked like. It looked like a third-floor door and a man named Roland on the other side of it. It looked like making very certain that Roland Ashcombe understood the specific and personal nature of the consequences he was accruing. He did not go upstairs because he was standing on the sidewalk running the outcome, and the outcome was not clean. Lyra would know what he'd done. She would have to live in that apartment, with that information, with whatever Roland's response to being confronted was. And Roland's type did not respond to confrontation by becoming smaller. Roland's type responded by finding the nearest available target. The nearest available target lived on the third floor. He stood on the sidewalk for 4 minutes. He knew it was 4 minutes because he watched it happen on his watch, which was a habit from a time in his early career when he'd needed to track elapsed time during operations and had never fully stopped. 4 minutes of standing in the cold with his hands in his coat pockets and his eyes on a lit window, and the full, uncomfortable weight of having information about a situation that his usual mechanisms could not cleanly resolve. Then he walked back to his car. The drive home was 20 minutes, and he spent them in silence that his driver understood well enough not to interrupt. He went to his study. He poured 2 fingers of scotch. He did not drink it. He sat in the chair behind his desk and looked at the photograph of Roland Ashcombe that Beach had included in the file, and thought about the difference between being a man who could do almost anything and being a man who understood when almost anything was not the right thing. He picked up the phone and called Kyle. "Friday's too long," he said when Kyle answered. "I need what you have now." A pause. Shuffling. Kyle was meticulous and did not like presenting incomplete intelligence, which was one of the things Kieran valued about him. "I've got 60%. "Talk me through 60%. Oops. What Kale had found in 5 days was enough. Roland Ashcombe owed money. Not unusual. A lot of people owed money. What was unusual was the specific geography of what he owed and to whom. He had a history with 3 different loan operations, all of them connected, in the way that operations in the city's outer financial ecosystem tended to be connected, to networks that Kieran either owned outright or had influence within. The total exposure was not enormous by the standards of Kieran's world, somewhere south of 40,000, but to a warehouse shift supervisor on a dock worker's salary, it was a number that required managing. Roland managed it the way men like him always managed it. He paid minimums. He borrowed from one end to pay the other. He kept the structure barely stable through a combination of partial payments and the social cover of being a man that a particular sergeant named Culver didn't scrutinize too hard. "The Culver connection," Kieran said. "How deep?" "Cousin, like Beach said, works dispatch at the dock. Nothing dramatic. Roland's not paying anyone off. There's no money for that. It's just the kind of thing where a sergeant logs a call and sees a name he recognizes and decides the paperwork doesn't need to go anywhere." "And the debt holders?" "2 of them are downstream from Merritt's operation," Kale said. Merritt was a man who had understood 6 years ago that it was more profitable to exist within Kieran's sphere than outside it, and who had made the appropriate arrangements. "The third is independent but small, probably approachable." Kieran was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. "Finish the picture. I want everything by Thursday morning." "What's the play?" I don't have a play yet, Kieran said. I have the beginning of one. He hung up and finally drank the scotch and thought about what Lyra had said in the sitting room. Your concern can only make things worse. She had meant worse for her. She had been doing the arithmetic of her specific situation, and she was not wrong about the arithmetic. She was only working with incomplete variables. She didn't know that the men her stepfather owed money to were men who existed within Kieran's reach. She didn't know that the particular kind of leverage Roland had assembled over her life, her income, her isolation, the implicit threat of violence, the systematic removal of any external support, was not a permanent structure. It was a temporary one that relied entirely on Lyra having nowhere else to go. Kieran was good at changing the geography of where people could go. He went to bed at 2 and slept, for the first time in 4 nights, without interruption. She came in Wednesday at the usual time and said good morning to him in the hallway with the same carefully composed voice, and he said, "Good morning," back and watched her eyes, which did not quite meet his, which had shadows beneath them that had nothing to do with lighting. He let her work. He spent the morning in meetings that required his full attention and gave them his full attention because this was another thing he was good at. The ability to be entirely in one place while a separate part of his processing ran continuously on a different problem. By noon, he had conducted 3 meetings, signed off on 2 contracts, and dealt with a personnel problem in his East Side operation, and he had also, in the background, finished constructing the architecture of what he was going to do about Roland Ashcombe. He called Cale at 12:30. "I want to purchase Roland Ashcombe's debt," he said. "All of it. Every note, every outstanding balance, every informal arrangement. I want it consolidated, and I want it in my name by the end of next week." Silence. Then, "That's a straightforward transaction on the merit end. The independent one might require some persuasion." "Persuade them. And once you hold it, then I have a conversation with Roland Ashcombe." Another silence. Different quality. "Kieran," Cale said, which was notable because Cale used his name approximately twice a year, and both times had preceded statements that Cale considered important enough to risk the informality. "This is personal." "Yes." "Personal has a different cost structure than operational." "I know." "And you've thought about the downstream—" "Cale," Kieran said, "buy the debt." A pause. "All right." He hung up. He went to find Lyra, prompt. She was in the east wing, working on the upper hallway. He heard her before he saw her. The specific rhythm of her work, which was methodical and quiet and very thorough. He had noticed in the 3 months she'd worked here that she was excellent at her job. Not the servile kind of excellent that came from fear of consequences, but the absorbed kind, the kind where a person took a task seriously because seriousness was the only mode they trusted. She moved through the estate the way a careful person moved through a space they respected, and it had struck him more than once that there was something almost incongruous about it. The level of attention she paid to a house that was not hers, owned by a man she barely knew, while apparently being unable to direct any of that same attention toward the circumstances of her own life. He understood now that the incongruity was not a mystery. The estate was a place where the rules were clear and the expectations were defined and the threat landscape was navigable. Home was none of those things. She heard him coming and turned. "Mr. Drakov," she said. "I need 5 minutes," he said. Something moved behind her eyes. Not quite fear. The anticipation of something unwelcome. "I'm in the middle of papatsi." "5 minutes," he said. "Please." The please landed. He could see it. She set down what she was holding and folded her hands in front of her, which was the gesture she used when she was bracing herself, and waited. He had thought about how to do this. He had thought about it for 2 days and had run through several approaches and had eventually arrived at the conclusion that there was no clean approach, so he would use a direct one. "I spoke to you last Saturday about your situation," he said. "Yes. You told me your concern couldn't help and would make things worse." Her chin came up slightly. "I stand by that." "I know you do," he said. "And I want you to know that I'm not here to argue with your assessment of your own situation. You understand it better than I do." She blinked. She had not expected that. "But I want to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to actually hear it and not dismiss it as something I'm saying to make myself feel better about noticing something I shouldn't have noticed." A pause. She was watching him carefully. The composure was in place, but it was working harder than usual. "What happened to you is not your fault," he said. "Not any of it. Not whatever happened before you worked here. Not whatever is happening now. I know you know that in the abstract. I also know that the abstract version is useless when you're inside a situation. But I need to say it anyway because I think you might have gone long enough without anyone saying it to you directly." The silence in the hallway was very complete. "That's the first thing," he said. "The second thing is this. I'm not going to pretend I'm not going to do anything. I am going to do something. I haven't decided exactly what yet, and I'm going to do it in a way that I believe will not create more immediate danger for you. But I won't insult you by pretending otherwise." Her expression shifted. What went through it was complicated and moved fast. Something that might have been relief, and something that might have been terror, and something that might have been anger, all of it compressed into the half-second before the composure came back down. "You can't," she said. "Whatever you're thinking." "You're not going to talk me out of it," he said, not unkindly. "You don't understand what happens when someone interferes," she said. Her voice had something new in it. The steadiness was cracking slightly at the edges, not from weakness, but from the pressure of trying to make him understand something she had learned the specific hard way. "The last time someone tried to help, a woman from work, 2 years ago, she called a hotline on my behalf. She thought she was doing the right thing. He found out. I don't know how. He always finds out. And the 2 weeks after that were the worst of my life. She meant well. It made everything worse." Kieran looked at her. "I'm not a woman from work," he said. She stared at him. "I know that's not modest," he said. "I'm telling you anyway." The anger came more clearly then. He was glad to see it, actually. The anger meant she was present, not only enduring. "So because you're powerful, it's different," she said. "Because you have money and connections? You think that changes what he's capable of?" "No," Kieran said. "I think it changes what I'm capable of." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. It was the sound of someone who had been told too many times that this time would be different. "Lyra," he said. She looked at him. "Last Thursday night," he said, "I was outside your building." The color left her face. "I heard what happened," he said. "I heard what you said afterward." She turned away from him. The movement was sharp, involuntary, the specific motion of someone who had been caught in a private moment and wanted a wall between themselves and whoever caught them. She put her hand against the hallway wall, and he could see her shoulder blades through the fabric of her uniform, the tension in them like something pulled too tight. "Please don't," she said. "I'm not here to pity you," he said. "Then leave it alone." Her voice had gone to something very quiet, something that was barely managing itself. "You heard something you weren't supposed to hear, and you feel responsible, and I'm telling you that you're not. I'm not your problem." "No," he said. "You're not." She turned back to look at him. "But he is," Kieran said, and something in the way he said it, the flatness of it, the complete absence of performance in it, the quality of a statement rather than a threat, made her look at him for 3 seconds without any composure at all. Just her face. And what was in her face was a complexity that no human being should have had to learn how to carry at 26 years old. Then the composure came back, heavy and practiced and complete. "I need to finish my work," she said. "I know," he said. She picked up what she'd set down. He walked back down the hallway. He did not look back. She didn't come in Thursday. Or Friday. Petra told him Friday morning. Lyra called yesterday afternoon. She said she needed some personal time. She sounded... Petra paused, which was unusual for Petra, who was not a woman given to hesitation. She sounded like someone who didn't want me to ask questions. "Did you ask questions?" "I told her the position would be here when she was ready to come back." "Good," Kieran said. He went to his study and called Beach. "Where is she?" he said. "Apartment," Beach said. "She hasn't come out since Wednesday evening." "Roland?" "Came home Thursday at the usual time. Hasn't left since either." Kieran was quiet. "Sir," Beach said carefully, "do you want me to—" "No," Kieran said. "Nothing yet. Stay on it." He hung up and sat very still for a moment. 2 people in an apartment and neither of them coming out, and Lyra had heard what Kieran said. Wednesday, and now she was not at work and Roland was home. He ran the possible explanations, and most of them were ones he preferred not to dwell on, but dwelling on them was necessary because pretending they weren't possible was the kind of thinking that led to arriving somewhere too late. Cale called at 3. "The debt purchase is done," he said. "All 3 notes. Total exposure is 38,400. The independent holder required some encouragement, but he came around. When can I set up the meeting with Roland?" "Whenever you want. Though I'd suggest not coming to the apartment." "No, not the apartment." He thought for a moment. "Find somewhere neutral. Somewhere public enough that he understands the nature of the meeting, but private enough that we can talk. The kind of place where he knows he can't make a scene." "Exactly." "I'll find something. When?" "Monday," Kieran said. "Give me the weekend to see if she comes back to work." She didn't come back Saturday. Sunday morning, Beach called at 8:47. "She came out," he said. "She's at the bus stop now." "Which direction?" "South Line." South was away from the estate. Away from work. Kieran thought about where the South Line went and what was down there on a Sunday morning and could not construct a reassuring picture. "Stay with her," he said. 22 minutes passed. He sat at his desk and did not look at the file on it. His coffee went cold. Beach called back. "She went to a walk-in clinic on Devers Street. She's been inside for 40 minutes. A pause. "She came out. She's got a bag from the pharmacy. She's—" Another pause. "She's sitting on a bench outside the clinic. Sir, she's just sitting there." Kieran picked up his coat from the chair where he'd set it the night before. "I'm coming," he said. He told his driver to take him to Devers Street and said nothing else for the entire drive. When they pulled up, he got out and walked to where Beach was standing at the corner, hands in his pockets, watching a bench 30 feet away. She was sitting with the pharmacy bag in her lap and her hands folded on top of it. She was wearing the dark blue coat, the one with the worn cuffs. Her hair was down. She was looking at the street in front of her with the specific quality of attention of someone who was not actually seeing anything. He walked toward her. She heard his footsteps when he was 10 feet away and looked up, and her face did something he had never seen it do before. It simply fell. All the composure at once, not the controlled retreat he'd seen in the hallway, but a sudden collapse, like a structure that had been load-bearing too long and had finally located a moment when it was safe to give. Her eyes were swollen. The right side of her jaw had the beginning of a discoloration he recognized immediately. He sat down on the bench beside her without speaking. She looked back at the street. "I told you not to interfere," she said. Her voice was rough. Not from crying, from the particular rawness of someone who had spent a night in the specific kind of helpless silence that follows violence. "I know," he said. "He knew I'd spoken to you." She said it flatly. "I don't know how. Maybe someone on your staff. Maybe he followed me to work. Maybe he just—" She stopped, swallowed. "He said if I went back there, he would make sure I understood what that cost." Kieran looked at the side of her face. Something in his chest went completely still. Not the stillness of control. The stillness that came after, when the anger had burned past the point of heat into something cold and absolute. "Lyra," he said. She turned and looked at him, and her eyes were dry, which was somehow worse than if they hadn't been. "I need you to understand something," he said. "What I'm going to do now, I am not asking your permission. I am telling you out of respect, because you deserve to know what's coming, but I'm not asking for your permission, and you cannot talk me out of it." She stared at him. "You asked me to leave it alone," he said. "I tried. I can't." Her hands tightened on the pharmacy bag in her lap. "If you do something to him, I'm not going to hurt him," Kieran said. She waited. "I'm going to give him a choice," he said, "and then I'm going to let him make it." The traffic moved on Devers Street. A cloud passed across the thin Sunday light. Somewhere down the block, a child was laughing at something, and the sound of it was completely at odds with the bench and the pharmacy bag and the bruise darkening on the jaw of a woman who had spent 14 years apologizing for being hit. "What kind of choice?" she asked. "The kind he can't refuse," Kieran said. She was quiet for a long moment. He did not rush her. He sat beside her on the bench with the cold morning around them and waited, because she had spent years in a situation where her timing was not her own, and he was not going to take that from her now. "And if he chooses wrong?" she said. Kieran looked at her. "He won't," he said. There was something in his voice that was not a threat and not a promise and not a comfort. It was a simple statement of structural reality from a man who had spent 20 years building a world in which he was the variable that changed outcomes. She heard it. He could see her hear it, the way you could see a word land on someone who had forgotten what it felt like to have someone say a thing and mean it without qualification. She looked back at the street. "I need to go home," she said. "I'll have someone drive you." "No." She stood. "No, I'll take the bus." He stood too. He looked at her in the gray Sunday light, this woman with the pharmacy bag and the worn coat cuffs and the jaw that was going to be a full bruise by tomorrow morning, and said nothing for a moment because there was nothing left to say that the morning hadn't already said. "Monday morning," he said, "your job is still yours if you want it." She nodded once. She walked toward the bus stop. He watched her go. Then he took out his phone and called Kale. "Move the Roland meeting to Monday morning," he said. 8 a.m. before she gets to the estate. I want it done before she walks through my door." "Understood," Kale said. And if he doesn't take the offer. Kieran watched Lyra reach the bus stop and stand with her back straight and her arms at her sides and the pharmacy bag hanging from one hand. And he thought about a cracked apartment window and a slap and a woman's voice saying, "I'm sorry," to the man who had just... The meeting place Kyle chose was a diner on Merchant Street called Halsey's. The kind of establishment that had been in the same family for 30 years and survived by being unremarkable in every direction. Booths with cracked vinyl, coffee that was hot and nothing else, a counter that ran the length of the room, and a cook who minded his business. It was the kind of place where a man could be told very bad news in a relatively public setting and understand that the publicness of the setting was itself part of the message. Kyle had reserved the back booth. Kieran arrived at 7:50 and ordered coffee. He didn't intend to drink and sat with his back to the wall, which was always his preference, and watched the door. Roland Ashcombe walked in at 8:04. He was larger in person than the photograph had suggested. Not taller, but broader, the kind of broad that came from physical labor sustained over decades and was now distributing itself differently as the labor decreased and the drinking increased. He wore a jacket that had been decent once. He had the walk of a man who was trying to look unworried and was not succeeding, which told Kieran that whoever Kale had sent to communicate the meeting invitation had communicated it correctly. Roland scanned the room. His eyes found Kieran and stayed there for a moment. Then he came to the booth and sat down across from him without being invited to, which was a small dominance gesture that Kieran noted and did not react to. "Drakov," Roland said. Not a question, establishing that he knew who he was sitting across from, which was its own form of performance. "Mr. Ashcombe," Kieran said. A waitress appeared. Roland ordered coffee. When she left, he put both hands flat on the table and looked at Kieran with the particular expression of a man who had decided that the best defense was a performed offense. "I know who you are," Roland said, "and I'm going to tell you straight off. Whatever this is about, you've got the wrong man. I'm a dock supervisor. I move freight. I don't have anything your kind of people would want." "Your kind of people." Kieran cataloged it without comment. "You owe $38,400, Kieran said, spread across 3 separate lenders. As of Friday afternoon, I own all 3 notes." Roland's hands on the table went very still. "I'm not here to collect," Kieran said. "I'm here to offer you a transaction." The coffee arrived. Roland didn't touch it. His jaw was working slightly, the motion of a man recalibrating. "What kind of transaction?" he said. "A simple one," Kieran said. "You take $50,000 in cash. That's your debt cleared, plus $11,600 free and clear, and you leave. Not the apartment, not the district, the state. You go somewhere else, and you build a life there, and you never contact Lyra Ashcombe again. No calls, no letters, no intermediaries. You become someone who used to live in this city." Roland stared at him. "That's it," Kieran said. "That's the entire offer." The silence in the back of Halsey's diner had a specific texture. The cook was doing something at the far end of the counter. Someone at the front booth was reading a newspaper. The ordinary world, conducting its ordinary morning 12 feet away. "She went to you," Roland said. "No. She's been talking to you about..." "She has never said a single word to me about you," Kieran said. "Not one. She has in fact spent considerable effort attempting to convince me that her situation is nobody's concern but her own. She would be extremely unhappy to know this meeting is taking place. Roland looked at him for a long moment. Something was moving behind his eyes. Kieran could see it. The rapid calculation of a man trying to locate the angle, trying to find the shape of what was actually being offered and what was actually being threatened. This was a man who had operated for years in an environment of implicit coercion, the physical kind, the simple arithmetic of being larger and louder and more willing to harm. And he was now sitting across a table from someone whose coercion operated on entirely different frequencies, and he was trying to translate. "And if I say no," Roland said, "then I call in $38,400 in debt," Kieran said. "Today. All of it. The terms on 2 of those notes include provisions for immediate collection that the previous holders were not in a position to enforce. I am." He picked up his coffee cup and set it down again without drinking from it. "And I refer your name to an acquaintance of mine who has a professional interest in warehouse operations at the South Dock. He's been looking for a reason to conduct a thorough audit of freight movement on the South Line for about a year. A supervisor's name appearing on his desk tends to accelerate that kind of interest." Roland's face had changed. The performed composure was gone. What was underneath it was not fear exactly. Not yet. But the beginning of fear, the recognition of it approaching. "You're threatening me over a housemaid," he said. "I'm offering you a very good deal," Kieran said. "What I'm threatening you with is what happens if you decline it." Roland sat back. The booth vinyl made a sound. He looked at his coffee, and then at the table, and then at some middle distance that contained whatever private arithmetic he was running. Kieran waited. He was good at waiting. "I need to think about it," Roland said. "You have until Wednesday," Kieran said. "Cale, the man who contacted you, has a number. You call it by Wednesday noon. If I don't hear from you by noon Wednesday, I assume you've declined and I proceed accordingly." He stood, took a folded bill from his jacket and set it on the table for the coffees. "I'd encourage you not to discuss this meeting with Lyra. She'll be distressed on your behalf, and she's had enough distress." He said it without any particular inflection. He let Roland hear whatever he wanted to hear in it. Then he walked out of Halsey's diner into the Monday morning and got into his car and told his driver to take him to the estate. He felt, for the first time in 2 weeks, the beginning of something that might eventually resolve into relief. He should have known better than to feel it that early. Lyra came to work at 8:47. He saw her from the upper landing as she came through the service entrance, the dark blue coat, the careful posture, and the bruise on her jaw now fully formed and dark against her skin. She did not look up at the landing. She went directly to the service corridor and he heard her speaking briefly with Petra, the ordinary exchange of a staff member arriving and receiving the day's assignments. He went to his study. He had 3 meetings before noon and conducted them with his usual precision. He signed documents. He resolved a dispute between 2 of his operation managers that had been festering for a month. He ate lunch alone and read the afternoon reports and did not think about Roland Ashcombe more than twice. Wednesday came. At 11:58, Cale called. "He took it," Cale said. "Called 2 minutes ago. He wants the cash in hand before he signs anything." "That's reasonable," Kieran said. "Set it up for Thursday. Have the papers drawn. Relinquishment of any financial or legal claim over Lyra Ashcombe, standard language. I want it airtight. And I want a witness who isn't on my payroll." "I'll use the attorney on Renner Street," Cale said. "She's discreet and she owes us nothing, which is better for the document." "Good." He hung up. He sat at his desk for a moment. 38,000 in debt absorbed, 50,000 dispersed. 1 transaction, and the structure that had held Lyra Ashcombe in place for 14 years was going to dissolve like it had never existed. Roland would be gone by the weekend. The apartment would be hers. The income she earned and had never been allowed to keep would be hers. The next step, the apartment in her name and the financial setup, he would manage through Kyle with the same care and without fanfare. Not charity, just the removal of obstacles. He was good at removing obstacles. He allowed himself, briefly, the thought that this was almost over. He should have known better than to think it. But Thursday came and went without contact from Cale, which meant the signing had gone according to plan. Friday morning, Kyle confirmed it. "Done," he said. Roland Ashcombe signed at 10 a.m. Thursday, took the money. He had 2 bags already packed, which suggests he'd been planning to accept since Monday. And he's gone? His car left the Callaway building at noon Thursday. Beach tracked him to the interstate heading west. He hasn't come back. Kieran was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. Move to the next phase. The apartment setup. I want it done quietly. Have the lease put in her name at a new address, building on the north side, the one on Arlen Street that we hold the management company for. Reasonable rent, nothing that would raise questions. Have the first 3 months covered without her knowing the source. And when she finds out? She'll find out eventually. That's a bridge we'll cross. He hung up. He went to find Lyra. She was in the west corridor as she usually was on Friday afternoons. He found her with a cloth and a polish, working on the dark wood of the banister with the same absorbed precision she brought to every task. She heard him coming and turned. Do you have a minute? He said. She set down the cloth. Yes. I have some information, he said, that I think you should have. He watched her face change. It happened slowly, the composure adjusting, reshaping around whatever she was bracing for. Roland is gone, he said. She looked at him. He left the city Thursday, Kieran said. He won't be coming back. The silence that followed was very different from the silences he'd sat inside with her before. This one had a different quality, not the taut, managed silence of someone containing fear, but something more disoriented. The silence of a person who had just been told that the largest object in their landscape had been removed and was trying to understand what the landscape looked like without it. What did you do? She said. It wasn't quite a question. I gave him a choice, Kieran said. He made it. What choice? He owed money to people who owe things to me. I purchased his debt and offered him a clean exit. Cash, in exchange for leaving and relinquishing any hold over you legally or financially. She stared at him. He signed a document, Kieran said. Legally witnessed. Whatever claim he had to your income, your residency, anything, it's gone. Something moved through her face that was too fast and too complicated to name. He saw the sequence of it. Disbelief first, then a kind of fragile, dangerous hope, then something that looked almost like fury. You did that, she said. Yes. Without telling me. Yes. The fury settled. You didn't ask me, she said. You just... She stopped. Started again. You made a decision about my life without... I made a decision about his, Kieran said. His debt, his exit, his choice. You weren't involved because I didn't want him to know you were the reason, and because I knew if I told you in advance you would have tried to stop it. You're right, she said. I would have. I know, because you don't understand what this means. Her voice had a sharp, tight edge he hadn't heard from her before. You think you've fixed something. You've moved him. You haven't fixed anything. He's going to... She stopped. The fury was doing something to her composure that he found himself watching carefully, because beneath the anger was something much more fragile that was only visible in the places where the anger cracked. He'll come back. Or there'll be consequences you didn't calculate. There are always consequences. Lyra, he said. Don't. Her voice dropped. Don't say my name like that means anything. You went into my life and you moved pieces around like it was one of your operations and you never asked me once what I wanted. He let that sit for a moment. It deserved to sit. You're right, he said. She blinked. You're completely right, he said. I made a unilateral decision about something that belongs to you. I did it because I was afraid that if I asked you first, the answer would be no, and I was not willing to accept that answer. That's not a justification. It's just what happened. She looked at him for a long time. Something in her face was doing the slow, difficult work of processing a truth it wasn't ready for. What happens now? She said. That's up to you, he said. There's an apartment, North Side, Arlen Street. It's in your name. First months are covered. After that, it's yours to keep or not as you choose. You don't have to take it. She looked away, at the banister, at the cloth on the floor. He's really gone, she said. Not to him, to herself. Yes. The corridor was very quiet. The afternoon light came through the high window at the far end and made a long rectangle on the floor, and neither of them moved through it. Then her phone rang. It was in her uniform pocket, and the sound of it in the silence made them both go still. She looked down at the pocket with an expression he'd never seen from her, something almost afraid of the object itself. She took it out and looked at the screen. Her face went the color of ash. She picked up the call and said nothing, just listened. He watched her face while she listened, and he watched everything he had constructed over the past 2 weeks. The plan, the architecture of the exit, the careful and considered removal of Roland Ashcombe from the equation. He watched it begin to come apart in the specific way that things came apart when a variable you hadn't accounted for made itself known. Her hand, holding the phone, was shaking. She lowered it from her ear slowly. She didn't end the call. She just lowered it and stood there in the west corridor with the afternoon light on the floor, and her face completely emptied of everything it normally held. "Lyra," he said. She looked at him. "My mother," she said. Her voice was completely flat, the flatness of shock rather than control. "That was my mother's neighbor. My mother is in the hospital." He waited. "She had a fall," Lyra said. "In her house. She's been on the floor for they don't know how long. They said at least a day. She stopped. Her free hand had come up to press against her mouth and then dropped back down. "She lives 4 hours from here. She's been there alone since I haven't been able to visit in 3 years. He wouldn't let me go. He said..." She stopped again. The shape of it landed on Kieran like something physical. 3 years without contact. An elderly woman 4 hours away, isolated by the same controlled geography that had isolated Lyra from everything else. A fall. A day on a floor. The specific cruelty of a damage that didn't announce itself as damage until it was already done. He opened his mouth. His phone rang. He almost didn't answer it. He looked at the screen and saw Cale's name and something in the pattern of it. Cale never called twice in one day without cause. Made him pick up. "Not a good time," he said. "I know," Cale said. "I need 40 seconds. It's about Roland." The hairs on the back of his neck went up. "Talk," he said. Beach lost him. Cale's voice was careful and precise, and completely without the steadiness that usually characterized it, which meant that whatever he was about to say next was something that Cale himself had not been able to absorb cleanly. He tracked him to the interstate, west on the 9, and then the car stopped at a service station outside Heller, and Beach held position at distance, and when the car pulled out again he followed it, and it wasn't Roland. Kieran went very still. "He hired someone to drive his car," Cale said. "Same jacket, similar build. Beach didn't pick it up until the car stopped at Heller, and the man got out and it was wrong. By then Roland had a 90-minute head start in an unregistered vehicle we don't have a plate for." "Where?" Kieran said. "We don't know. That's the problem. We don't know where he is. We don't know where he's going, and..." Cale paused. "Kieran, the document he signed. I spoke to the attorney on Renner Street 20 minutes ago. She's gone through it again, and there's a problem." "What problem?" "The relinquishment clause. Roland's attorney, the one who showed up Thursday, the one I assumed was a standard local attorney, he introduced a modification in the final version that our review didn't catch before signing. The clause is written to cover financial claims only, not residency, not contact." Kieran heard the words. He processed them. He looked at Lyra, who was standing 6 feet away holding a phone that had just delivered her one catastrophe, standing in the hall of his house, pale and still, and waiting for him to finish his call so she could fall apart in private, the way she always fell apart in private. "The document is unenforceable as a no-contact order," Cale said. "We have his signature on a financial arrangement. That's all. Legally speaking, Roland Ashcombe is free to..." "Stop," Kieran said. Cale stopped. Kieran stood in the west corridor with both problems occupying the same moment. Lyra's mother on a hospital floor 4 hours away, and Roland Ashcombe in an unknown vehicle with 90 minutes of invisible road behind him and a modified document that meant the architecture Kieran had spent 2 weeks constructing had just... "Cale," Kieran said, "find him." He hung up before Cale could respond and looked at Lyra standing 6 feet away in the west corridor with her phone still in her hand and her face the color of something drained. And he made the calculation in the same second that he made the decision, which was how he'd always operated, the thinking and the choosing happening simultaneously rather than sequentially. "Your mother," he said. "Which hospital?" She blinked. The question had cut through whatever she'd retreated into. Mercy General in Caldwell. 4 hours. Yes. Get your coat, he said. We're going now. She stared at him. What? Your mother is in a hospital 4 hours away and you have no car. Get your coat. You can't… Lyra. His voice came out flat and very direct and left no room for the argument she was building. We can discuss everything else in the car. Right now you need to go to your mother. Get your coat. Something in her face broke open just slightly at the edges and then reformed. She nodded once and went to the service entrance where she'd hung her coat, and he went to his study and took 30 seconds to send Cale 3 words. Find him first, and then picked up his own coat and keys and went to the garage and told his driver he was taking a vehicle himself, which happened rarely enough that his driver looked briefly startled before stepping aside. He drove. She sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap and looked at the road ahead and said nothing for the first 20 minutes, and he let the silence be what it needed to be, the specific silence of someone trying to hold themselves together through the forward motion of a vehicle, because forward motion was the only thing currently available. When the city fell away and the highway opened up, she said, "How did he get past you?" Not a question, a statement with a question shape. He switched vehicles at a service station, Kieran said. My man lost him. So you don't know where he is? Not yet. She was quiet for a moment. He knew, she said. He knew you'd follow the car. He planned it. She said it without surprise, without satisfaction, just the flat recognition of a woman who had spent 14 years learning the specific operational intelligence of one man's cruelty. He's been doing things like that for years. He thinks about how people will react and he plans around it. He's not smart in most ways, but he's smart about that. I know, Kieran said. Do you? She turned and looked at him for the first time since they'd gotten in the car. Because from where I'm sitting, you spent 2 weeks building something you thought was airtight, and he dissolved it in one move. So I'm asking seriously, do you know what you're dealing with? It was the sharpest thing she had ever said to him. He deserved it. No, he said. I underestimated him. She looked at him a moment longer, then she turned back to the road. He's going to my mother, she said. The words landed like something dropped from a height. Why? Kieran said. Because it's what he does when he loses control of a situation. He finds the next available leverage. My mother is the only person left who… She stopped, swallowed. I haven't been able to reach her in 3 years. He controlled my phone, my money. When I tried to call her once about 2 years ago, he found out and… She didn't finish that sentence. She didn't need to. She doesn't know what's been happening to me. She thinks I just drifted away. He made sure of that. He told her I didn't want contact. He sent messages from my number. She thinks I chose this. Kieran's hands on the wheel were very still. And now, Lyra said, he knows he's lost me. So he's going to go to the one person who might give him something to bargain with. He's going to go to my mother, and he's going to make sure that whatever happens next, he still has a piece of it. He won't get near her, Kieran said. You lost him, she said. Not cruel, just precise. I lost his car, Kieran said. I haven't lost the problem. He picked up his phone from the cup holder and called Kyle without taking his eyes from the road. Mercy General Hospital in Caldwell, he said when Cale picked up. Patient named… What's her name? Ellen, Lyra said. Ellen Marsh. She kept her first husband's name. Ellen Marsh, Kieran said. I need 2 people at that hospital within the next 3 hours. They stay outside her room, and they do not let Roland Ashcombe within 50 feet of the ward. Can you do that? I can do that in 2.5 hours, Cale said. Do it. I'm also running the unregistered vehicle angle, Cale said. Roland used a debit card at the Heller service station to pay for fuel. We picked it up through a contact at the bank. I have the pump number, and I'm working on getting the station's exterior camera footage. How long? 40 minutes, maybe less. Call me the second you have a plate. He ended the call. The highway stretched out ahead of them, flat and gray under an afternoon sky that was beginning to drop toward dusk, the light going thin and cold at the edges of the fields on either side. Lyra was looking at him. You have contacts at banks, she said. Yes. And you can put people in a hospital ward in 3 hours. 2.5. She turned back to the window. He could not read what was in her face in that moment. It was too many things at once, processed by someone who was running on shock and old fear and the specific disorientation of a life being rearranged at speed by forces she had not authorized and could not fully stop. "I'm angry at you," she said. "I know. I'm also—" She stopped, started again, quietly. "I'm also very tired of being the only person in a room who can't do anything." He said nothing. There was nothing to say to that wouldn't be cheap. They drove. Cale called back in 34 minutes. "Plate," he said, and read out the number. Registered to a rental company out of Heller. Roland paid cash for it, which means someone drove him to the rental office before he switched cars. This was planned at least 2 days in advance. "Before he signed the document," Kieran said. "Yes," Cale said. "He walked in Thursday with a modified document and an exit plan. He took the money, and he was always going to run his own play." The money. $50,000 of Kieran's money, now in Roland Ashcomb's possession, funding whatever Roland Ashcombe had decided to do with the freedom Kieran had handed him, while congratulating himself on the elegance of the solution. "Can you track the rental plate?" Kieran said. "Already have a contact running it through toll cameras on the western corridor routes. If he took any of the main roads, we'll have a location in under an hour." "He's going to Caldwell," Lyra said from the passenger seat. She wasn't looking at him. She was watching the fields move past the window. "Tell him to look at the routes to Caldwell." Kieran repeated it to Cale. A pause. "Running it now. My people at Mercy General are 30 minutes out." "Tell them no confrontation," Kieran said. "They're there to observe and contain, not to engage. If Roland shows up, they call me immediately and they do not move on him until I give the word." "Understood." He ended the call. His jaw was tight. He could feel it. The specific physical tension of a man who had made an error and was now operating in the space that error had created, which was a compressed and unforgiving space with fewer options than the original landscape had contained. "The money," Lyra said. "He took your money." "Yes." "Does that matter to you?" "Matter to." "Not particularly," he said. And it didn't. The money was a line item. What it represented, the assumption that Roland could be managed like a financial problem, that a clean transaction could resolve what was fundamentally a human situation, that mattered. The error mattered. The money was just the evidence of it. "It should," Lyra said. "You should be furious." "I am furious," Kieran said. "I'm just not furious about the money." She looked at him. The highway light was failing now, the late afternoon collapsing into the early gray of evening, and in the dimness of the car her face had a different quality. Less managed, the control worn thin by too many hours of too much. The bruise on her jaw had gone darker. He could see it even in the low light. "He's going to try to use her," Lyra said. Not distress now, just assessment. The particular clear-eyed thinking of someone who had spent years learning the mechanics of a single threat. "He knows I'll come. He knows you'll come with me because you've already committed to this. He's going to try to be there first, and he's going to try to make it so that whatever happens next, he controls the terms." "He's not going to control anything," Kieran said. "You don't know that." "No," he said. "But I'm going to make it true anyway." She stared at him. In the thin evening light, with the highway empty ahead of them, Kieran Dreykov driving at 110 miles an hour toward a hospital in Caldwell, with both hands steady on the wheel and his face doing nothing visible. She stared at him for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted into a territory he hadn't seen from her before. Not trust, exactly. Something more provisional than trust. The first stage of it, maybe. The willingness to consider the possibility. His phone rang. Cale. "Toll camera hit," Cale said. "Rental plate picked up on the Route 7 corridor heading east-northeast 40 minutes ago. He's not going to Caldwell." Kieran's foot came off the accelerator slightly. "Say that again?" "He's not heading to Caldwell. Route 7 east-northeast goes to one place of significance if you're Roland Ashcombe with $50,000 and a head start." Cale paused. "It goes back to the city." The car was very quiet for a moment. Kieran said, "He's going back to the apartment." "Or," Cale said, and his voice had the careful quality it got when he was delivering something he'd confirmed but didn't want to deliver. "He's going somewhere else in the city. Somewhere that makes more sense as leverage than a hospital 4 hours away. Somewhere closer. Somewhere he knows. Kieran turned it over fast. Roland heading back. Not to Caldwell, not to Lyra's mother. Back to the city. Why go back with the money and the head start and the window he'd manufactured? Unless... Cale, he said. The estate. A beat of silence. He knows she works there, Kieran said. He's been to her place of work. Lyra said he tracked information about her movements. He knows the address. He knows she's... He stopped. Lyra had gone very still beside him. He doesn't need her mother, Kieran said. He's been to the estate. If he gets into that building, if he gets to any of the staff, to Petra, I have people at the estate, Cale said quickly. Standard security, they've been there all day. They don't know what Roland looks like, Kieran said. They're not looking for him. They're watching for our usual threat profile. Roland Ashcombe is a warehouse supervisor in a decent jacket. He'll walk in through the... He cut himself off. Lock it down. Full lockdown. Right now. Nobody enters without verification. Call Petra directly and tell her to go to the secure room and stay there. Doing it, Cale said, already moving. Kieran could hear him on another line. And get me a position on that rental plate. I want to know where he is in the city in real time. Working on it. Kieran, do you want to turn back? Kieran looked at the road ahead. Caldwell was 90 minutes away. The city was 90 minutes behind them. Lyra's mother was in a hospital bed, injured, alone, and had been told for 3 years by a man she had no reason to distrust that her daughter had simply stopped caring. The hospital was the reason they were in this car. The city was where the problem had just redirected itself. No, he said. Keep going, but I need someone on that plate and I need them calling me every 10 minutes. Done. Cale hung up. The car was silent. Lyra was looking at her hands in her lap. He's not going to my mother, she said. No. He's going back. Yes. To do what? Her voice was very quiet. He has the money. He could just go. He could go and this would be over and... She stopped. He heard her understand it in real time, the way understanding arrived sometimes. Not all at once, but in stages, each one worse than the last. He's not done, she said. He doesn't want to be done. He wants to demonstrate that he can't be managed, Kieran said. That's all this is. He took the deal and the money, and he made his own plan because sitting across from me in that diner and taking that offer felt like losing. And men like Roland don't lose and then walk away. They find something to break on the way out. So everything you did is still standing, he said. He can't touch the legal document. He can't touch your finances. He can't reverse what's been set up for you. What he can do is show up and make noise and remind everyone that he exists and wasn't simply erased. She turned and looked at him. What do you think he's going to do? He thought about Roland Ashcombe walking into a space associated with Kieran Dracoff and what that would look like to a man who had decided the only remaining move was some form of demonstration. He thought about Petra, who was small and efficient and completely unequipped for this specific variable. He thought about the staff who moved through the estate every day, doing their jobs inside the ordinary assumption of safety. I think, Kieran said, that he's going to try to find something that matters to you. She was very still. And I think he's calculated that the thing that matters to you is the job, Kieran said. The stability, the routine, the first thing in 3 years that was yours and only yours. I think he's going to go there and make sure it doesn't feel safe anymore. He felt her process that. Felt it like a change in the air pressure inside the car. Then turn around, she said. My people are locking it down. Turn around, she said again. My mother's neighbor already called Mercy General. The hospital knows she's there. She's not alone. But the estate? Petra is there, the kitchen staff, people who don't know anything about this. And Roland is heading toward... Cale's people don't know what I know, she said. Her voice had gone somewhere new. Not the careful control, not the managed composure, but something direct and urgent and entirely unperformed. I have been watching Roland Ashcombe operate for 14 years. I know how he moves. I know what he looks like right before he does something he can't take back. Your security team doesn't know that, I do. He looked at her. She looked back at him. In the car on the empty highway in the evening dark, Lyra Ashcombe was not asking. She was not deferring. She was not managing her voice or her posture or the expression on her face with the bruise still dark on her jaw. She was looking at him with her full attention, direct and unguarded, and what was in her eyes was something he recognized because he had felt it himself often enough to know its specific weight. The refusal to be passive in the moment that mattered. He held her gaze for 2 full seconds. Then he hit the brake, checked the mirrors, and pulled a controlled U-turn across both lanes of the empty highway, the headlights sweeping through the dark and then settling back on the road, heading north, heading back, the engine climbing as he accelerated. 90 minutes. Cale called at the 20-minute mark. "Plate camera," he said. "He's in the city. He's on Keller Avenue." Keller Avenue was 4 blocks from the estate. "ETA on additional support," Kieran said. 12 minutes, Cale said. "But Kieran, our current team at the estate is reporting something. Service entrance on the east side. Someone tried the intercom 3 minutes ago, and when the staff didn't respond, they moved around to the secondary access point on the north wall." Kieran's foot pressed harder on the accelerator. "He knows the layout," Lyra said. She had heard. Her voice was steady. "The delivery entrance on the north side has an older lock. He's seen me come and go from that side. He knows that entrance." "Cale," Kieran said. "North side delivery entrance, right now." "On it." A burst of noise on the line, not static, something physical, the sound of a door. Then voices. 2 of them. One of them recognizable as one of Kieran's men, and the other louder, rougher, with the particular pitched aggression of a man who has made a decision and doesn't intend to unmake it. Roland was already inside. "How far?" Lyra said. Not to Cale, to Kieran. He looked at the GPS. 7 minutes, he said. She nodded once. Her hands came up and pressed flat on the dashboard, not braced for impact. Just a physical anchor, the body needing something solid while the mind ran ahead to a place it wasn't ready for. 7 minutes. The estate lights appeared on the horizon at the 4-minute mark. The upper windows lit against the dark, and Kieran pushed the car faster and the engine sound climbed and his phone was ringing. Cale again. And through the phone he could hear the specific sound of a confrontation inside a building that was supposed to be a fortress and had briefly become something. He heard it before he saw it. The phone still in his hand, Cale's line still open, and through it the sound of something breaking. Not glass, something heavier, furniture maybe, the specific crash of an object displaced by force, and then a woman's voice, high and sharp, that he identified as Petra, and then Roland's voice, loud and without the careful performance it had worn in the diner booth, stripped down now to what it actually was, underneath all the management and the planning, raw and cornered and ugly. Kieran pulled the car through the estate gate without slowing for it to fully open, the side mirror clipping the post, and covered the drive to the entrance in 12 seconds. He was out of the car before it had fully stopped, Lyra moving at the same moment on the passenger side, and he did not tell her to stay back because he already knew she wouldn't, and because some part of him understood that this ending did not belong only to him. The front entrance was unlocked. His own security, 2 men, both of them physically capable, and both of them currently positioned in the main hallway with the specific, uncertain posture of people who had contained a situation but not resolved it, looked at him when he came through the door, and one of them said, "East corridor, sir." He came in through the north service and went straight for the... Kieran was already moving. He heard Roland before he turned the corner into the east corridor. I don't know what you've been doing?" 14 years. 14 years I kept that roof over her head, kept her fed, kept her from ending up on the street like her mother would have let her, and she goes running to some... Kieran came around the corner. The east corridor was lit the way it always was in the evening, the wall sconces throwing warm light that made everything look more civil than it was. Roland Ashcombe was standing in the middle of it, 15 feet from the entrance to the kitchen hallway, and he had Petra by the upper arm. Not violently, not yet, but with the grip of someone making a point about what he could do. Petra was very still, her face arranged into the expression of a woman who was furious and disciplined enough not to show it as fear. 2 of the kitchen staff were visible at the far end, frozen in the kitchen doorway. Roland heard Kieran's footsteps and turned. The performance came back for exactly 1 second. Kieran could see him reach for it, the composure, the constructed reasonableness. And then it fell away again because Roland was a man who had been running for 6 hours on adrenaline and $50,000, and a plan that had felt clean when he'd made it, and was now dissolving into the specific exposed feeling of a man who had walked into a space and found it less empty than he'd expected. "Let her go," Kieran said. Roland's hand stayed where it was. "We're going to have a conversation," Roland said. His voice had the slightly elevated quality of someone who had been drinking, not heavily, but enough. "You and me, without the lawyers and without the arrangements. You're going to look at me and you're going to understand that you don't get to buy people." "Let her go," Kieran said again. Same tone, same volume. Roland released Petra. Petra stepped away from him with the precise, controlled movement of a woman who had made a decision not to run and was honoring that decision. She looked at Kieran. He gave a minimal motion of his head toward the kitchen, and she moved in that direction, collecting the staff from the doorway with a single sharp gesture. And then the kitchen door closed, and the east corridor was 3 people: Kieran, Roland, and Lyra, who had come around the corner behind Kieran and stopped 8 feet back. Roland saw her. The change in his face was immediate and total. Everything that had been aimed at Kieran redirected. It was like watching a compass needle swing, fast, involuntary, pulled by something magnetic and old. "There she is," he said. His voice did something complicated on those 3 words, something that was not quite affection and not quite ownership, and was worse than either, because it was both simultaneously. The tone of a man who had confused possession for love for so long that the distinction had ceased to exist for him. "You did this," he said to her. "You went to him." "She didn't," Kieran said. "Don't." Roland's eyes didn't move from Lyra. "Don't cover for her. She's been doing this. Looking for someone to... She's always done this. Found someone to use. Someone to..." "Roland," Lyra said. Her voice was quiet. Not the managed quiet. Not the performed calm. Something underneath all of that. Bedrock. "Stop," she said. He stopped. Not from respect. From the specific surprise of a man who had been the loudest presence in a room for so long that a direct instruction from a particular source had the power to interrupt him simply by being unprecedented. She walked forward. Not toward Kieran. Toward Roland. Kieran did not move to stop her, though every instinct he had was doing something loud and urgent in the background. He watched her walk past him and stop 6 feet from Roland Ashcombe and look at him. Really look at him, the way you looked at something you needed to see clearly before you could put it down. And the east corridor held its breath. Roland was breathing hard, she was not. "You came back," she said. You took his money and you came back." "I came back because you don't get to just erase 14 years, Roland said. "Because someone had to say it to your face. You walked away from everything You hit me," she said. The words were small and flat and filled the corridor completely. "You hit me and I apologized," she said. "For years. Do you understand that? Do you know how many times I said sorry to you for something you did to me? Do you have any idea what that costs?" Roland's jaw worked. "I never..." "Don't." Her voice went sharp at the edges for one moment and then came back level. "I'm not asking you to admit it. I know you won't. I'm not asking for anything from you. I'm telling you something so that when I'm done telling it, it exists outside of me. You took 14 years. You took my mother. You took everything I earned. You took the most basic assumption that I was safe inside my own life. And you are never going to apologize for it. I know that. I've known that for a long time." Roland said nothing. His face had gone through several things and landed on something that was not quite shame. He was too far past the reach of shame, but was adjacent to it. The expression of a man confronted with a version of events that he had spent years successfully not seeing, now rendered unavoidable by the specific quality of attention being directed at him. "So I'm not going to stand here and wait for an apology," Lyra said. "I'm going to tell you that it happened, that I know it happened, that I am the only record of most of it, and I intend to be a very thorough record for the rest of my life, and then I'm going to ask you to leave." A long silence. "Just like that," Roland said. "Just like that," she said. "And if I don't," Kieran spoke then, "then I will make the remainder of your existence in this country extremely inconvenient. The 50,000 you have in your pocket is the last clean money you'll see. The debt I hold is forgiven if you walk out of this building and disappear. If you don't walk out, the debt comes back plus interest plus the attention of several people whose professional focus you do not want. He said it without heat, without performance, the plain language of arithmetic. You've already lost. The only question is whether you lose cleanly or not. Roland looked at him. Then he looked at Lyra. Something moved across his face that might, in a different man, in a different life, have been grief. It moved through fast and left nothing behind. You think he's going to take care of you, he said to her. I'm going to take care of myself, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked past her toward the main entrance, and neither of them moved to stop him, and Kieran's two men fell in behind him at distance, and the front door opened, and the cold night air came briefly into the corridor, and the door closed. The east corridor was very quiet. Lyra stood with her back to Kieran, facing the space where Roland had been, and he watched the back of her and watched her shoulders and watched the specific physical process of a person at the exact moment that a weight they have been carrying for so long they forgot it was separate from themselves. Finally, actually, lifts. Her shoulders dropped, not from defeat, from the absence of bracing. She stood there for a moment and breathed, then she turned around. Her eyes were dry. Her face was not composed, not in the usual sense. The management was gone. The careful architecture of expression she wore like a second uniform. What was there instead was just her face, without armor, exhausted and present and real. Is it over? She said. Yes, he said. She nodded once, slowly. Then she walked to the wall, put her back against it, and slid down until she was sitting on the floor of the east corridor of Kieran Drakov's estate, with her knees drawn up and her head tipped back against the wall, and her eyes closed. He stood and looked at her. Then he went to the kitchen and came back with a glass of water, and sat down on the floor beside her, which was not a thing he had done in longer than he could calculate, sitting on a floor, and set the glass within her reach. She opened her eyes. She looked at the glass. She looked at him. You sat on the floor, she said. Yes. Your suit probably cost more than my rent. Probably, he said. She almost smiled. The corner of her mouth moved slightly toward it. It didn't complete itself, but the movement was real. She picked up the glass and drank and set it back down. My mother, she said. My people are with her. She's stable. The fall was hard, but they're telling me no permanent damage. She's going to need some recovery care, but she's going to be all right. Lyra let out a breath that had been held so long it shook slightly on the way out. She thinks I stopped caring, she said. She thinks I just chose not to be in her life. You can fix that, he said. Can I? She turned her head against the wall and looked at him. This close, without the distance they usually kept, he could see all the details of exhaustion in her face. The shadows, the bruise, the particular texture of a person who has held themselves together through force of will for hours and is now in the very first moments of release. 3 years of silence. He sent messages from my phone. She'll have read them. She'll have believed them. She'll also have the chance to hear your voice now, he said, and what you say in your own voice will not sound like what he wrote. She was quiet for a moment. You're not good at comfort, she said. No, he agreed, but that was actually helpful. I know the difference between those things, he said. Usually, she almost smiled again. This time it went further. It still didn't complete itself, but it was closer, and underneath it, tentative and uncertain and entirely new, was the specific expression of someone who has remembered after a long time that they are capable of being the kind of person who smiles. They sat on the floor of the east corridor for another 10 minutes without speaking. It was the most human 10 minutes Kieran Drakov had spent in a very long time, and he did not know what to do with that assessment except to sit inside it and let it be what it was. The weeks that followed were quiet in the way that Aftermath was always quiet. Not peaceful, but cleared. The noise had stopped, and what remained was the work. Roland Ashcombe was tracked to a city 3 states west, where he took a room in a residential motel and began the process of becoming someone who used to matter. Cale's contacts confirmed his location weekly. He made no contact with Lyra. He made no contact with Ellen Marsh. He cashed the $50,000 across several institutions over the following month and left no further financial footprint that Kieran's people could identify. He existed. He just no longer existed in a way that touched anything that mattered. The apartment on Arlen Street became Lyra's by the end of the month. She took it. She called Kieran to tell him she was taking it and that she would be paying the actual market rent as soon as she could, and that she was not accepting charity, only the removal of obstacles. He said that was fine. She said she knew it was fine. She hung up before he could say anything else, which he found, to his own surprise, something close to amusing. She went back to work. Not immediately. She took a week, which Petra managed without comment, and she used the week to drive to Caldwell. She did not ask Kieran to come with her. She went alone. He found out afterward from Beach, who was still maintaining observation as a precaution, that she had spent 3 days in Caldwell, that she had sat with her mother in the hospital room for most of the first day without speaking very much, that on the second day she had spoken quite a lot, that on the third day Ellen Marsh had reached up from the hospital bed and taken Lyra's hand and held it, and Lyra had sat with her back straight and her chin down and had let herself be held, which was not the same thing as holding on, and was considerably harder. Kieran did not share any of this with Lyra. She came back to work on a Tuesday. She arrived at 7:58, which was her time, and she nodded at Petra and she collected her assignments and she moved through the estate with the same thoroughness she always brought to it, except that something in the way she moved had changed. It was subtle. The kind of thing that only registered if you had been watching someone long enough to have a baseline. She moved like someone who had remembered that the space they occupied was theirs to occupy. He crossed her in the hallway mid-morning, and she looked up and said good morning and met his eyes directly, which she had not done consistently before. And he said good morning back, and they went their separate directions, and it was entirely ordinary and also not ordinary at all. She knocked on his study door at the end of that first day back. He said, "Come in," and she came in and stood near the door with her coat over her arm and said, "I want to ask you something." "All right," he said. "Why?" she said. "Not the practical reasons. Not because you saw the bruises or because you had the means or because it became a problem you could solve. The real reason. Why did you care?" He looked at her for a moment. It was a question he had asked himself in various forms over the past weeks and had not answered cleanly because the honest answer was not clean. "Because I'm very good at reading patterns," he said. "And the pattern I read in you was someone who had been told, over and over, by every system available to tell it, that they were not worth the trouble of being helped. And I found that," he paused, "unacceptable." She looked at him. "That's not the whole answer," she said. "No," he said. "It's not." She waited. "The whole answer," he said, "is that I've spent my entire adult life in rooms making decisions about what things are worth. And somewhere in the middle of watching you move through this house doing your job with that level of attention, while carrying what you were carrying, I understood that I was watching someone worth considerably more than their circumstances had priced them at." He held her gaze. "I don't like mispricing. It's an offense to the math." The corner of her mouth moved. "The math," she said. "The math," he said. This time the smile completed itself, small and brief and real, and it changed her face in a way that made it look like a different face, or rather, like the face that had been there all along, underneath everything that had been stacked on top of it. She put her hand briefly on the door frame. A small gesture, almost nothing. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome," he said. She left. But time moved the way it always moved, indifferently and at its own pace, with no interest in the significance of any particular moment. Lyra worked at the estate for another 8 months. In that time, she opened a bank account in her own name. She learned how to choose her own groceries without the specific anxiety of someone who had once had their choices monitored and corrected. She called her mother every Sunday, and the calls started short and careful, and over time became longer and less careful. And one Sunday, she talked for 2 hours without once checking over her shoulder. She started taking night classes at Kastner Community College. Biology first, then anatomy. Then a conversation with a woman who taught one of her courses who supervised a program at a children's hospital across town. She applied for a nursing school scholarship in February. She told Kieran in passing the way she had started to tell him things, not confiding exactly, but the ordinary information exchange of two people who shared a space and had stopped performing formality with each other. "Nursing school," he said. "Pediatric track," she said. "The professor at Kastner has a connection at the hospital. There's a program for trauma-specialized pediatric care, and she thinks I might have a particular, she paused. Aptitude. He looked at her. For recognizing fear in children, she said. Simply, without drama. He said nothing for a moment. When do you hear back about the scholarship? He said. March. Let me know, he said. She looked at him with the particular expression she had developed for the moments when she suspected he was about to do something she hadn't asked for. I'm not asking for anything. I know, he said. Let me know anyway. She got the scholarship. She let him know. She quit in April, 2 weeks before the nursing program began. She gave proper notice and trained the woman Petra hired to replace her, and on her last day she came and knocked on his study door again. He said, "Come in." She came in. No coat this time, just herself. I wanted to say it in person, she said. You already thanked me, he said. Not for this part, she said. For... She stopped, reorganized. For the floor, that night, the corridor, you didn't have to do that. Sit on the floor? Be a person, she said, instead of whatever else you could have been. He looked at her. She looked back at him. The afternoon light was coming through the study window, and it caught the side of her face that no longer had a bruise on it, and hadn't for months. And she stood in it like someone who had stopped being afraid of the light finding her. Take care of yourself, he said. I intend to, she said. She left. He sat in his study for a while after she was gone, looking at the window, and thought about the particular and unpredictable ways that the things you chose to notice changed the shape of what you became. The coffee place they settled on was a small Italian-style cafe on Mirren Street called Ancora, which had been there for 40 years and made espresso the way espresso was supposed to be made, with no ceremony and no apology. It became, over time, an annual thing. There was no formal agreement. It simply happened. She called the first year, in November, and said she was going to be near his part of the city and asked if he had an hour. He said yes. They sat in the back corner of Ancora for 90 minutes, and she told him about her first clinical rotation at the Children's Hospital, and he told her almost nothing about his world because his world was what it was, and she knew that, and neither of them found it necessary to perform surprise about it. The conversation was easy in the way that conversations were easy between people who had been through something real together and no longer had anything to prove to each other. She came back the following November, and the year after. Each year she was different. The changes were not dramatic. She was not a different person. She was the same person with more room in her voice, in her posture, in the way she looked at things. The nursing degree came, the job at the Children's Hospital came, the specialization in pediatric trauma came, and she described it to him in the third year over espresso, describing the work of recognizing fear in children who had learned to hide it. And he listened to her the way he always listened, completely, without interruption. And when she was done, he said, You're good at it. I know what I'm looking for, she said. Yes, he said. You do. She looked at him across the small table. Does it bother you, she said, that your world is what it is and mine is what it is, and they're so completely... No, he said. You didn't let me finish. I know what you were going to ask, he said, and the answer is no. My world is what I built it to be. Yours is what you built yours to be. I don't find the distance between them troubling. She was quiet for a moment, turning the small espresso cup in her hands. I do sometimes, she said. Think about it. What you are and what you... She stopped. I'm not judging it. I just think about it. That's reasonable, he said. You're not going to explain yourself. No? I didn't think so. They sat with that for a moment. The cafe moved around them. A couple near the window, a man reading at the counter, the ordinary afternoon life of a place that had been serving coffee for 4 decades without caring much about the conversations that happened over it. I'm moving my mother here in the spring, Lyra said. She's recovered well. The apartment above mine in the Arlen building came open. That's good, he said. She doesn't know about you, she said. I mean, she knows someone helped me. She knows there was a person. She doesn't know the specifics. She doesn't need to, he said. No. She looked at him. But she said something when I told her there was someone who saw what was happening and decided to do something about it. She said she wished she could thank them, and I said I'd pass that along. He looked at Lyra Ashcombe across the small table in Ancora Cafe on Mirren Street, this woman who had come into his house 3 years ago carrying wounds no one was willing to see, and who had, in the space between then and now, built something out of the raw material of everything she'd survived. And he felt, not pride exactly, because pride implied ownership, and he had no claim to what she'd become, but something in that vicinity, the satisfaction of a man who had made one correct decision in the right moment and had the rare privilege of seeing what it compounded into. "You've passed it along," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. They finished their coffee. On the street outside, the city was doing what the city always did, moving, loud, completely indifferent to the two people standing on the sidewalk in front of a cafe that had been there for 40 years. "Same time next year?" she said. "I'll be here," he said. She pulled her coat closed against the November cold and turned to go. He watched her walk down Mirren Street. This woman with her straight back and her unhurried step and the 20 years of life still ahead of her that she was going to fill with children who looked the way she used to look, children who had learned to be very still in the presence of loud things, children who had swallowed their fear so many times it had become indistinguishable from breathing, and she was going to see them clearly, every one of them, because she knew exactly what to look for. She turned at the corner. She did not look back. He stood on the sidewalk a moment longer and then turned and walked in his own direction, back into the world he'd built and maintained and would continue to maintain, and neither of them would speak of the other in any particular way to the people in their separate lives. And neither of them needed to, because the thing between them had no name that would have improved it. It was simply this. One person had chosen to look, and the other had chosen to heal. And both choices, made in the right order at the right time, had made possible a life. Not a rescued life, a reclaimed one. And Lyra Ashcombe walked toward the rest of it without looking back, measuring nothing by the years she'd survived, only by the years she finally, fully lived.